The price of power has got everyone scratching their heads at the moment, with people, companies, processors, farmers all struggling to see how they're going to pay the bills going forward. And apparently, it's been an issue a long time in the making. Senior reporter Richard Rennie is here to try and figure it all out. G'day, Richard.
Hi, Brian. How are you going? Yeah, bit of a group effort this week. We got Neil Wallace down in Otago's had a look at the meat sector, and Annette Scott and Ashburton's having a bit of a look at the irrigation sector and implications for what these power prices mean. And I've sort of been trying to climb into veggies and the dairy sector as well. So, yeah, we're taking a pretty good stab at it this week.
First up, the power price itself. We know the hydro lakes are low. That's usually the driver of power prices.
Yeah.
Is that it?
Well, we almost wish it was, don't we? I mean, we seem to lurch from these across these hydro shortage scares, every 2 or 3 winters. At the moment, the hydro lakes are only 50% of where they should be on their 5-year average, and they're actually in the bottom 5% of where they've ever been. So they are really low. So that is a problem. But there was one guy I spoke to, Jonathan Pooch, who's an energy consultant in Canterbury, and he said, we almost wish that was the only problem, but the holes in the Swiss cheese have lined up. He said, our gas reserves are about 20% less than what we thought they were, so that's not great. The lakes are low by half, like we said. We're trying to get out of coal to decarbonise. The big Lake Onslow hydro battery project never went ahead. The government knocked that on the head, and energy companies were sort of holding back just to see, if they did go ahead with it as a government, then an energy company's not going to go and invest in more generation if the government's doing it for you. And on top of that, Tiwai Point, which everyone thought maybe shut, it accounts for about 12% of our power, didn't shut. I think it's another 20 years or something. So as a result, it's all come at once, and there's this big slug of stored energy's been taken out of the system because we're trying to do more with electricity than we've done with coal in the past. So, yeah.
Now, I've heard, over the past few days, some people say this is why we need to, not turn our back on fossil fuels. We need to use more coal and gas for now. And then I've heard other people say this is why we need to install more hydro, geothermal and solar faster. I mean, what are we supposed to do?
Everyone's got a view, eh? And the CEO of Open Country, Mark de la Tour, said some people are using this as an opportunity to say, we shouldn't be an energy intensive primary sector processing, we should be high tech. But he said, if we were high tech, we'd be needing probably even more energy. So that's not really an exit strategy. And I guess the attention of this really came from Weston Curtin, the mayor of Ruapehu. Was it last week? He blew the whistle on this. We're talking about the Winston timber mills down in Ohakune. There's 2 of them. We're going to have to be laying off 300 staff because they can't afford to literally keep the mill running because the electricity costs have gone up 6-fold since 2021. And 300 people, what do they do if you're in Ohakune and you lose your job? There's not, you could argue even the ski field's not looking at perspective as an employment option at the moment either.
That takes us to primary sector, food processing. Running around the traps, how are people thinking about the meatworks and the dairy processing and that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, Neil had a chat with ANSCO, and they've been really focusing really hard on trying to reduce their electricity costs. They've knocked a few $100,000 out of their system, but actually at the bottom of the bottom in terms of what they can reduce through different processing systems and refrigeration systems. Interestingly, in irrigation, Annette was talking to Colin Glass at Dairy Holdings, the largest dairy farming company in the country. Obviously using a lot of irrigation, or will be, if there's enough water to irrigate with come springtime. And thus, Colin was saying, well, we've actually managed to cut the cost a bit on that a lot, by having pressured irrigation systems that don't need pumps. Of course, a lot of farmers down south now in Canterbury, they're not pulling so much water out of the ground, so you don't need deep well pumps to pull it up. So a saving there. His concern was more around, as much as anything, will there be enough water to irrigate with come spring? But the big one is really around dairy, I think, Brian, coming into peak dairy season, and cows and milk wait for no man, as we all know. When the milk's out, it's got to be dealt with, it's got to be collected, and it's got to be processed. It's not like a timber mill, with all respect to that industry. You can leave a tree standing for another year if you have to, if you've got to put the brakes on things, but you can't tell the cow she can't come in and be milked. And that's where the real big pinch is coming in. Open Country Dairy's CEO, Mark de la Tour, he described the electricity costs as the light of a train coming down the tunnel at us. Yeah.
Yeah, and is that increase in costs going to have any impact on the milk price?
Yeah, he made no bones about it. He said that this is going to put definite downward pressure on milk solid prices for this season. For the dairy sector, it's increasingly difficult, if not impossible, for processors to meet these continuing increased costs. Yeah, and that's a pity. Dairy is the one sector that's probably doing the heavy lifting in the economy at the moment. It's kind of like if we were Australia, it would be iron ore, but for New Zealand, it's dairy and milk powder. So to see it under this sort of cost pressure after really sort of making quite a good recovery from a fairly pessimistic start last season is a real blow, a real concern. And as Mark de la Tour said of Open Country, it's not going away. It's not like, well, it'll rain, we'll get water in the high country and it'll fill the lakes. It may, but we're still short on gas.
Yeah. So who has a plan? The government, the private sector?
The
electricity operators?
Well, some would say, Brian, we should have had a plan 10 years ago about this. We wanted to move to more decarbonised systems, electrify our fleet and all the rest. And we've done a fair bit of that decarbonising, but there was no plan as to, well, okay, we do that, but how are we going to find more power to fuel it, to drive that? We seem to be a country that's getting better at dealing with crises rather than being more reactive than proactive. And Shane Jones described this on national radio the other day. He described the Electricity Authority that's required to police and oversight these things as a chocolate teapot. I think he was meaning that it sort of melts a bit under pressure maybe and not really been effective enough. But really, I think, and there probably will be an inquiry, there always is, isn't there? But I think there really needs to be some solid bipartisan discussion on what's our energy policy going to be for the next 50 years so we don't get into these. This is having a real material effect on our ability to be a productive economy. And one consultant I spoke to, looking at the UK, provide a good roadmap. They've got I think it's a 40-year energy policy up to 2050 about how they're going to use energy, where it's going to come from, main sources, that sort of thing.
Yeah, from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, our electricity market is a bit like, Uber. The demand surges, so does the price. Perhaps the market will help come to the party on its own, but
yeah, and I think politically it's very easy to go hunting down the gentailers, as they're called, because they generate and sell, don't they? Yeah. And so they're the baddies, but really I think they're really only doing what a normal market would do. And even Mark de la Tour said they're really only acting as you'd expect the market to act. There's a shortage of energy supply and prices go up. And traditionally the move would be another cheaper source would fall in place. Well, if it does happen, it's not going to happen anytime quite soon. Even to import containerized liquid natural gas is 6 to 8 months. And if we did have to go all out and build a gas terminal, you're talking 5 to 7 years for something like that. And it's going to be cheap, and who's going to pay for it?
Bit of pain to come then, it seems.
I think so, yeah.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Brian. We'll catch up.